After acquiring their second vestige, our intrepid band of adventurers hurried back to Nicodranus after receiving word nearly a week prior from their old friend Gymnast Stormwind that there was a strange man with a changing face looking for them and requesting to meet at their earliest possible convenience. So it was that upon arrival to the port city, the enigma that is Dahan Omu awaited them. Increasingly intrigued and concerned about Ryan's third gemstone, he informed them that since last they spoke, he'd sent a band of mercenaries to look further into leads from the sting operation. Specifically, they were investigating one of 3 known cults of the Dragon Queen. They learned as much information as the man was able to provide about the 3 cults, their general known locations and makeup, and what little was known about their intentions. Dahan suspected that whatever may be happening to Ryan could be a result of one of these groups, and he asked that if the party had time, would they mind looking into them further for him. As they already had plenty on their plates, they politely declined but offered to send him word if they discovered more on their own or if they accomplished the other things they had set out to do. The masked man gave them a small scroll case with which to magically exchange letters with him and his match case. Then they readied their supplies for a trip back to the Dwendalian Empire, loaded up their wagon, and set out back north, still as yet uncertain their intended destination. Should they go toward Malaesmere and the Savalier Wood? Should they follow up on information about these cults and travel across the Ashkeeper Peaks? Was there any good way of tracking a pixie girl who could fly, or would they be following blind luck alone? Naturally, they chose the latter. A quick stop in Allfield and asking around revealed 2 young women the locals didn't recognize that had passed by not more than a month ago. One of them, they said, had simply disappeared without a word. The other mentioned she was headed east. So, our adventurers also traveled east. Well, sort of. They followed the Empire Road, which took them northeast, but they figured that's about the best they could do. Besides, Grolid's order was housed in Felderwin, and Whiskey had spent a few years there as well. Perhaps they could get some insight into where to go next. Along the path from Allfield to Felderwin, they spotted a large metallic beast approaching them quickly from the air. While most of them hopped off the cart and prepared to face the creature, Pix freaked out and drove the horses and wagons off the road and careening toward the river. As the mechanized monstrosity approached, they realized it had the vague form of a chimera, though its parts were all robotic in nature. And, dropping in like shock troopers, were a whole squadron of mechanized soldiers, some with multiple sets of arms, some with wings, and all with carefully established tactical maneuvers, though they never once spoke. The fight was over with relative ease, but as they moved to salvage some of the parts from these strange entities, every part of their forms disintegrated into particles and scattered into the wind, leaving only a few javelins behind. Once they recovered Pix and the wagon, who had mercifully recovered from his fright, they continued into Felderwin and spoke with first the Starosta and then Grolid's old master about the situation. But when the Blood Hunter attempted to enter his former order house, he was greeted with quite a literal shock, as he had managed to set off the house's defenses. Eventually climbing through a now untrapped window, the group found Master Ibrahim laying in a pool of blood, nearly dead. After helping him recover, Ibrahim told Grolid there had been a spindly man wielding a jagged dagger who broke in the day before, demanding alchemical ingredients and lore books regarding dragons. The master said he believed he would have been able to handle himself quite handily against the man alone, as the girl in the hall didn't seem to want to participate in the fight, but that he had been blindsided by the skull produced from the man's satchel and realized far too late that this was some form of a demi-lich. While the rest of the party believed this girl and skull to be those they were searching for, Grolid turned white as a sheet at the description of the dagger. He believed this item to be the very thing that once killed him, and indeed had even belonged to him at one point. And if so, it was imperative that he recover it and, in his eyes, to destroy it. It was decided that the man was very likely going to find the bones of the ancient white dragon Voragal, who had been slain by a group known as Vox Machina a few decades ago, but not before he brought about the destruction of the entire kingdom of Draconia. From there, they suspected a man powerful enough in necromancy and with the assistance of a demi-lich might be able to resurrect such a terrifying beast into a horrendous Dracolich. And so, with not much else to go on, the majority of the party decided the best course of action was to travel to the ruins of Draconia and try to intercept this man before he found his quarry. To do so from here, they hoped to find a ship and sail southward to Zarzith Kittrell, a new upstart city of Ravenite Dragonborn close to the southern coast of Xhorhas. But sailing required a ship, and as the harvest time had just come to a close, they were forced to wait a few days until the final ship of the season made it upriver to Felderwin. As it turns out, it's a good thing they were delayed. One afternoon, while training along the banks of the river and fishing on the shore, a local halfling farmer came sprinting up to them, wheezing heavily as he spoke, and requesting that someone help find his daughter because she'd been taken. The adventurers followed the trail of the kidnappers northward, far past the farmland, through a small grove, and out to the other side, where they discovered the remnants of an old walled town. Grollet and Whiskey vaguely recalled talk of an old Felderwin that had at one time been used as a garrison both by and later against the Empire. It was now left in disrepair as a message to others who chose to take up arms against the might of King Dwendal, and had in more recent decades been largely forgotten. Their investigation quickly revealed nearly a dozen hooded cultists with strange matching black and silver cloaks and a small halfling girl tied to a stone table. The party fought through their enemies as the chanting of the man nearest the table grew louder and faster, and the young girl continued to struggle against her bonds. Pix was able to get to her eventually and loose her ropes, to which she responded by snatching up a dagger, sprinting toward the man responsible, and plunging it deep into his neck. Even after Link placed a well-aimed arrow into his skull, she continued driving the dagger again and again into her captor. Eventually, the girl calmed down and introduced herself as Missy. She thanked them as if nothing strange had just occurred, and it was only after they questioned her did she explain that she had recently been recruited into the Blood Hunters Order of the Ghost Slayer, had survived the initial Hunter's Bane ritual, and was only here for a few more days before she would set off for Diastock to begin her formal training. Many of our heroes were bemused, but Nona felt like she had found a kindred soul to her own seething internal rage. After a happy reunion with her father, the rest of the night was full of merriment and celebration at the Hearty Harvest, the local tavern that they had been staying at. Harvest End was approaching, a full moon was rising, and spirits were high throughout the town. Anna and Pix had a heartfelt conversation about fear and the past, after which Anna gave Pix one of the items she used in her astromancy, a talisman of sorts, given by her parents that had been a source of good fortune and hope for her. Pix was grateful for the gift, but after Anna left, he couldn't help but be inquisitively drawn to this trinket and set about to try to disassemble it. He detected some part of it was magical, but couldn't quite place what. The little Kenku was horrendously unsuccessful and managed to actually mangle the talisman, though the strange star-shaped gear he was digging for did come out. Holding it in his hand, he attempted to identify the magic. What the rest of the bar downstairs heard was the ghastly scream of a dozen voices coming from a room upstairs. The group rushed up to find Pix out cold on the floor in his room, the star gear embedded in his palm, unmoving. Eventually, they got him back on his feet, but for a time all he could repeat in a heavily mechanized voice was the phrase, "I, he, we are coming." Over time, his senses came back to him fully, but he couldn't help shake the idea that he'd finally found what he was sent to find, and now needed to return. The problem was, he wasn't at all sure where it was he was supposed to return to. It took some time, but the evening finally settled back down, and the next day, the crew eventually set off on a small river sailing vessel bound for Trostenwald, with the agreement that, should all go well, they would attempt to make the trip to Zarzith Kittrell for the agreed-upon price. But things going well, they would soon find out, was not in the cards.